This is Christopher John Bjerknes. It is May 2nd, 2025. I've been saying for many decades that the dichotomy between communism and Zionism, Bolshevism, and Zionism is a false dichotomy, a false dialectic. They are both meant to accomplish the same messianic, apocalyptic, end times goals for the Jewish people. When I was researching Albert Einstein, it struck me very deeply that he was an ardent, rabid Jewish nationalist, the most famous Zionist in history. And that nationalism was countered by his communist globalism. Max Born talked about how red Einstein and his friends were. And there seems to be a split and a contradiction in that. Einstein said that he opposes all nationalism except for the nationalism of the Jews. So this is the most blatant hypocrisy imaginable. And a bulb went off when I was contemplating this for years. And it really struck me that, no, this isn't a contradiction for a Jew. This is absolutely the complete purpose of Judaism and the reason why Jews have remained segregated in the diaspora for 2,000 years, and the reason why the Jews themselves created the Roman exile when the crypto-Jew Tiberius Julius Alexander attacked Rome as a Roman general and didn't attack Rome, attacked Jerusalem as a Roman general and sacked the Jewish temple and destroyed the temple and set about the process of the Jews going into the Roman exile for 2,000 years. Meanwhile, his uncle, Philo-Judaeus, had created Christianity in Alexandria, Egypt, with which to usurp the Roman Empire and turn it against its own gods, as the Jews themselves stole those gods. And I understood immediately that this is what Einstein was up to. He was fulfilling Jewish messianic apocalyptic prophecy. The communists are the Jewish agents that were sent into the diaspora beginning 2,000 years ago to infiltrate all the governments and all the nations of the world and to turn them to the Jewish mission of Tikkun Olam, of destroying the Gentiles and creating a universal global Jewish government, which mission Marx took over with Marxism when he adopted communism and published the Communist Manifesto at the time that the gates and the fountains of wisdom were to be opened for the Kabbalists in 1840s. And this was all part of the plan. It is the same plan. The plan calls for a global Jewish government. That global Jewish government agenda is forwarded by the Jewish communists. It also is a nationalistic agenda, but only for the Jews. There were 70 nations, which are the generations of Noah, each led by a prince in the heavenly court, the 70 gods, who are the children of El and Asherah, who rule over the world that was created by the evil creator god Yahweh, Seth Typhon, the god of chaos, who created the world, and therefore it holds deed and title and apportioned it to each of those 70 nations. And then from those 70 nations was born Esau and Jacob. So they created the 71st and 72nd nations. And the 71st nation was led by the 71st prince, the chief of all the Goy nations, Samael, Satan himself, Ha-Satan, the accuser, the adversary, who flips at the end of this 2,000-year cycle of the diaspora, of the exile in the Roman Empire, and becomes the advocate of the Jews. And this is represented by Jesus Christ, who prosecutes the Jews through the 2,000-year empire of the Romans so that it spreads Christianity throughout the world and takes over the world, eliminates all the pagan gods, and puts the Gentiles under the yoke of the Jews. As I've explained over and over again, the first communists were the Christians, Carpocrates and his son Epiphanes, who created communism, the idea that women are communal property and all property is communal, and all of that was incorporated by the Gnostics into Christianity, who created communism, which was then forwarded by Marx. And as everyone knows, the communists took over Russia when Wilson and Ludendorff sent in the Bolshevik Jews to take over Russia, and they killed 30 million Eastern Europeans. By 1923, they killed another 10 to 15 million Ukrainians in the Holodomor, and then Stalin wiped out another 30 to 50 million Eastern Europeans, killed millions of Volksdeutsche and Germans and German POWs. Ilya Ehrenberg called for the mass rape of all German women and wanted all Germans exterminated. So all the greatest atrocities in human history have been committed by Christians and communists. The Christians killed at least 10 million of each other during the 30 Years' War and the Reformation and Counter-Reformation, this mass murder of this genocide of tens of millions of the best of the Gentiles, the bourgeoisie, the intellectual class of the Gentiles, who must be killed, as the Bible itself says, and as Shimon Bar Yochai, the hero of the Talmud and the supposed author of the Zohar, says. And that's the role of communism, is to kill off the best of the Gentiles so they cannot lead themselves. And Jews step in as the commissars, the communist commissars, to lead the Gentiles into their own ruin and to get rid of all Gentile government, all Gentile religion, and replace it with a global government. Global government is a messianic ambition of the Jews, the whole world ruled by the God of Israel, who is incarnated into King Messiah, son of David HaMelech, and he is to rule the world from Jerusalem. And all that's supposed to go down right now. So that's the role of the communist Jews, just as the original Christians were all Jews who filtered out and infiltrated into the Roman Empire and duped the Romans into abandoning their gods, and duped the Greeks into abandoning their gods, and duped the Egyptians into abandoning their gods so the Jews could steal them all and steal the beauty and might of the Gentiles by stealing their supernatural protection and their most powerful gods that had built up the Egyptian Empire, the Greek Empire, and the Roman Empire. The Jews took those gods so that they could eventually build the Jewish Empire to rule over the entire earth and to eliminate the four previous empires of the Persians, the Babylonians, the Greeks, and the Romans. And we today in the West are now the Roman Empire, the fourth empire that has to give way to the fifth empire of the Jews. And even the Persians, who helped to defeat the Babylonians and restore the Jews to Jerusalem and help them to build the supposed second temple of Solomon, get no mercy or sympathy or gratitude from the Jews, because if they did, then they would be allowed to keep some of their beauty and might and some of their empire. But no, the Jews believe all that belongs to them by divine right, and they have the right to steal it from everyone else. And if they fail to steal it from everyone else, they will fail to have their fifth empire to rule over the entire world, which is to be built by the communists, by the Soviet Russians, by the communist Chinese, by the communist Donald Trump and the Trotskyite neoconservative communists of the Republican Party, by the Democratic communists like Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. And you'll note that all these communists are Zionists. Now, in the Soviet Union, there was, beginning in the early 1970s, as I've covered in my books, there was a big anti-Zionist movement, and it was all bullshit. It was all to get the Muslim nations firmly into the hands of the communists and to give Israel a pretext for receiving weapons and support from the U.S. as a supposed staunch ally against the Soviet Union. And this goes all the way back to the foundation of the Soviet Union, which was in large part founded by Joseph Stalin and by Jews from the Soviet Union. And that was also a false dichotomy, the U.S. versus the Soviet Union, with Israel as the supposed ally of the U.S. and the Muslim countries as the supposed allies of the Soviet Union. Soviet Union always subverted the Muslim nations, gave them substandard weapons and ill advice. Meanwhile, the Israelis were taking all the military intelligence and weaponry technology intelligence and funneling it straight to the Soviet Union, just as the communist Jews did with America's atomic bomb secrets and America's thermonuclear weapons secrets, which the Jews handed over to our staunch enemies, the Soviet Union, so that we could mutually destroy one another as the Leviathan and the behemoth, mutually destroying one another and consuming one another, as the Midrash call for, so that the Jews can eat us both at the feast of the righteous at the end of time. And so this false dialectic of the communists versus the Zionists has a long, long history, which I was the first to document in my book, The Manufacture and Sale of St. Einstein, in 2006. I pointed out that this false dichotomy has its roots in a writer for the Jewish Chronicle in London, England, who wrote under the pen name Mentor, was tight with the Rothschilds, would often directly address the Rothschilds in these pseudonym-published articles. And I republished Mentor's articles talking about this. And then Chaim Weizmann went on to threaten the world, to say that the Jews are going to conquer Palestine and any Gentiles that help them will be rewarded, but those Gentiles who do not will be destroyed. And if no one helps them to take over Palestine, they'll instead take over the entire world. I'm going to republish those quotes. I was the first one to bring these up and translate them from the German in my book in Manufacture and Sale of St. Einstein in 2006, which you can find at my website, CJBbooks.com, together with contribution links if you would like to contribute to my work. I want to thank my dear contributors so much for keeping me going in this effort. I want to thank everyone who is helping me to expose Adam Green as a habitual plagiarist, ripping off my work and not giving me due credit. I'm the one who taught him, and these are my insights, not his. And a lot of what he says I had said in 2006 in the interviews he told me he listened to repeatedly with Darrell Bradford Smith, and in my book, The Manufacture and Sale of St. Einstein, which I'm going to show you in a moment. And I was the first to point out, people used to say that Winston Churchill had condemned both Zionism and Bolshevism as Jewish enterprises to take over and ruin the world. And I was the first to say that that was nonsense, that Winston Churchill was himself an ardent Zionist, and his article in the Illustrated Sunday Herald, Zionism versus Bolshevism, that I'm going to show you in a moment, was actually an appeal to the British and to the West to support Bolshevism under that threat that Chaim Weizmann had issued, that if they did not, then if they didn't support the Zionists, then the Bolshevik Jews would take over the world. And he correctly pointed out that Trotsky and the commissars of the Soviet Union were Bolshevik Jews, and that they were abhorrent, murderous, genocidal villains, fiends, demons in human form. And he utilized that threat to dupe Great Britain and the West into supporting Zionism with the sword of Damocles, that we would all get our heads chopped off by the Bolsheviks, the Red Terror, if we were not to submit to the Zionists and their will and their domination of the world. It was a choice between communism and Zionism, and that continues. We are continually told to choose between Chabadnik Netanyahu and Chabadnik Trump and Chabadnik Putin as representing the dichotomy between Zionism and Bolshevism, the false dichotomy. And again, these two things have the exact same ultimate goal: to create a world government, destroying all the monarchies, all the Gentile governments, all the Gentile religions, even all the Gentile languages, and replacing them with one universal global government, one universal global language, and one universal global God, the God of the Jews, to rule the entire world under King Messiah, the Messiah of the Jews, from Jerusalem, from Zion, as I've been saying very publicly for 20 years. That was my trademark phrase. They want their Messiah to rule the world from Jerusalem. That means a global government, the global government created by the communists to be ruled by the nationalistic Jews, the 72nd nation, whose guardian angel is the God of Israel itself, Shekinah. The chief god of the Gentiles is the 71st prince, Samael, the devil, who is the guardian angel of the Gentiles, as I was the first to bring to the world's public attention in 2006. And then the 70 nations below that are each apportioned to the children of El and Asherah as the 70 generations of Noah. And I was very struck. I've been leery of Norman Finkelstein the whole time. I gave a little promotion to his book, The Holocaust Industry, because it forwarded exposure of the Zionists. But I'm always suspicious of leftist Jews who fight against the Zionists, because, again, this has been a long-term communist agenda, just as the communists pretend to fight against the capitalists, and Karl Marx was called a self-hating Jew, but it was the Jewish bankers who were running both capitalism and communism. It was the Jewish bankers who financed Trotsky and Lenin, and it was the Jewish banker Jacob Schiff who financed and orchestrated the Russian Revolution. It was the Zionist Wilson administration, together with Ludendorff and the assistance of Zionist David Lloyd George and Churchill and the British and Arthur Balfour, who helped to set up the communist empire in the Soviet Union. And it was Hitler who, through the Molotov and Ribbentrop Pact, helped the communists to take over and commit genocide against the Polish people, who had resisted the expansion of Trotsky in the early 1920s. And Hitler helped the Bolshevik Jews take revenge on the Polish people by chopping it up together with Stalin. He was a staunch ally of Stalin. The whole thing was fake, as I also explained in my book, The Manufacture and Sale of St. Einstein. In 2006, that was another false dichotomy of Bolshevik Zionist Nazism versus Bolshevik Zionist Stalinism. And so it struck me today when I saw Norman Finkelstein publishing something, "The red flag will triumph, comrades. The red flag will triumph." And again, it's just obviously this same Jews controlling both sides, just as they do with Christianity versus Islam, which are both Jewish religions. They're both aiming towards Noahidism. Heads they win, tails you lose. Whichever one you pick, you're abandoning all your ancestral gods and handing over your Tiferes and Oitz, your beauty and might, to the Jews, and allowing them to steal your most powerful gods and use them against you to destroy you. And the ultimate quest of Judaism is to exterminate all the Gentiles. It's not to create a communist global utopia. The Jewish utopia is to have no Gentiles in it. So the ultimate apocalyptic messianic agenda is ultimately to wipe us all out. That is the purpose of Tikkun Olam. That is the purpose of the Jewish mission, which was explained by Mentor in the Jewish Chronicle, as I chronicled in my book, The Manufacture and Sale of St. Einstein, in 2006. So let's take a look at a lot of that history that I was the first to document in 2006 in my book, The Manufacture and Sale of St. Einstein, which you can find at my website, CJBbooks.com, together with links where you can contribute to keep me going forward with this, in spite of all the plagiarists, all the smearmongers who continue to attack me. And so this is what Norman Finkelstein posted. Let's have a look. Comrades, the red flag will triumph. Norman G. Finkelstein. And he put a link to this. Avanti popolo alla riscossa, mangiare rossa. Red flag, red flag. Avanti popolo. For people to the rescue. Red flag will triumph. Communism will triumph. Red flag must triumph. Communism must triumph. And long live communism and freedom. That's enough of that. So this is obviously that dialectic that the Soviets participated in, of the communists championing internationalism so there can be no Zionist nationalism. But lo and behold, Deuteronomy and the Jewish prophets, Isaiah and Ezekiel, and all the minor prophets forecast and plan for all this. They plan for a false Israel to arrive and for the whole world to unite to crush that false Israel and put the Jews through a furnace of affliction. As described in Jeremiah and Zechariah, 2/3 of the Jews are also slated to be exterminated together with the rest of humanity. So the communists can serve that purpose too, of bringing the whole world against Israel and its champion Amalek, the Edomite Roman Empire of America. And they may very well be planning to follow that script and to hammer Israel and kill off 2/3 of Jews, just as the communist Bolshevik Zionist Adolf Hitler persecuted Jews in the Holocaust. Stalin had his purges of Jews and incentivized the expulsion of Jews from the Soviet Union to Israel to populate it. That was all part of the plan. He was working for the Jews the whole time. He was married to Rosa Kaganovich, the sister of Lazar Kaganovich, the wolf who helped him exterminate 10 to 15 million Ukrainians, and was behind, together with Yagoda and Gingrich Yagoda, and the other Jews who committed those atrocities and helped Stalin to wipe out probably another 50 million Russians after Trotsky had wiped out not just Russians, but all Eastern Europeans and Germans throughout Eastern Europe. Lazar Kaganovich was a big part of that, and Stalin was married to his sister. Both of them were Jews, of course, as was Yagoda. And so this is all a farce. They are serving the apocalyptic messianic agenda of the Jews. The communists want to create the world government, and ultimately they may be involved in this planned apocalyptic war against the Jews of Israel to put them through the furnace of affliction again, to try them and to redeem them, and to see which Jews are loyal to the Jews and which Jews are part of the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, who must be cleansed out of the Jewish world so that their souls can be reincarnated and cleansed of the Goy blood of the Egyptians and the Europeans, and have that washed out of them through the process of trial and affliction and reincarnation until ultimately they can rejoin the Jewish people. This is the sick mentality and plans that these people have had for 2,500 years. These are the express plans that I decoded, the first in human history to thoroughly decode to this point and to share with you for free, as I'm doing now. And if you appreciate that, please do contribute. I am very grateful to all the people who have contributed and who have supported me through my trials and tribulations, the furnace of affliction of molten lead they're trying to pour on me to silence me and put me in a coffin where no one can hear me. Well, scumbags like Adam Green rip off my work and get boosted by the controlled alternative media as I get blacklisted and pushed out. As he's not nearly the only one. There are thousands of people who regularly rip off my work and take credit for my achievements. But I taught him directly, and it was a real betrayal what he did to me and is doing to me. Anyway, I digress. So in my book, Manufacture and Sale of St. Einstein, I published the full articles of Mentor in the Jewish Chronicle. I was the first one to document all that history, as I've said. And I republished Zionism versus Bolshevism, a struggle for the soul of the Jewish people. And at that time, it was the common myth that Churchill was condemning both Zionism and Bolshevism. And I was the only one who was pointing out, no, quite the opposite. Churchill was utilizing Bolshevism to threaten people so that they would embrace Zionism against their own self-interest. And of course, Zionism fulfills that messianic quest to create a nation of the Jews in Palestine, to restore the Jews in Palestine. And that is to happen so that the King of the Jews, the Jewish Messiah, can be anointed and rule the world from Jerusalem, my trademark phrase that falls on the lips of Adam Green quite often without an attribution to me. And he talked about the supposed good Jews and bad Jews. And the communists, as I quoted from the Great Soviet Encyclopedia, talked about the good Jews, the Marxists, Marx, Trotsky, who were the good guys who helped the Bolsheviks. And here on the other end of the spectrum of the same dichotomy and dialectic meant to achieve the same messianic goals of creating a world government under communism and Jewish nationalism under Zionism, so that the King of the Jews, the Messiah, can rule the whole world from Jerusalem. We have Churchill taking the opposite view to dupe the West into helping the Jews create their Zionist empire, which is ultimately to be an empire over the whole world. And Churchill had to be eminently aware of this, because this is the plan of Judaism. This is the entire Bible. This whole idea that there will be an end times kingdom ruled by the Jewish Messiah. And this messianic goal was being fulfilled by the Jews, and Churchill was forwarding that in the exact same way as Weizmann, by threatening the world public with the idea that the Bolsheviks would commit red terror against them if the West did not accede to and submit to Zionism and allow the Jews to fulfill their messianic nationalistic ambition. Meanwhile, Trotsky on the other side was leading Bolshevism, wiped out 30 million people by 1923. To fulfill the Jewish mission to exterminate the Gentiles and to create a global government, which they dubbed the International Communist Government, to eliminate all Gentile governments. And they would often do that in the name of separatism and balkanize the nations and empires through separatism, but that was not their genuine intent to create smaller ethnic nations. They used that as a pretext to petition for a Zionist Jewish state in Palestine at the end of World War I. And I documented the articles in that were gathered together in the books, the 4-volume set that Henry Ford published, The International Jew, The World's Foremost Problem, which were initially published in the Dearborn Independent and were written by Cameron and others who documented how the Zionists were stating long before World War I commenced that they would create this Congress that became the League of Nations in order to petition for a Jewish state, to carve it out of the Ottoman Empire, which would be defeated in this war. They based this on the nationalism of Mazzini and the Italians, who received help because they had helped to fight others' wars, so they utilized the Jews to help fight in World War I. With Lawrence of Arabia and others, they ensured that Jewish troops would partake in that endeavor to defeat the Ottoman Empire. So they knew that there would be a peace conference after the war, and that at that peace conference they would be allowed a seat at the table in order to petition for an ethnic Jewish state to be carved out of the empire. So they promoted the ethno-states of many other peoples, as did the separatists and of the Leninists. And Lenin said that he wanted to promote separatist movements like we see in America, where they are calling for secession. And Lenin said that he would promote secessionist movements, but this was to break apart the powerful nations and to provide a pretext for the Jews to create their own separatist and secessionist nation out of the Ottoman Empire in Palestine, so that they could garner all that support. And after the war, they did indeed receive a seat at the table in the League of Nations, and at the Peace Conference of Versailles. It was like a bar mitzvah. Commentators all over the world said that all the people there, it was a congregation of Jews. All the heads of state were simply puppets of the Jews: Clemenceau, Wilson, David Lloyd George. And it was a total farce, and it was completely unjust to the German people, and it was immediately recognized and satirized and cartoonized that this was all a setup for the Second World War to move Zionism to the next phase. And the Jews themselves were talking about that Second World War that was coming, that would achieve the next phase of persecuting the Jews and driving them down to Palestine and spreading Bolshevism further west into Germany itself. And the rabbis were talking about the Third World War that was coming in the 1920s and the 1930s. After saying that the Second World War would be even more devastating, the Chabadnik Jews were talking about how the Third World War would be the final battle of the war of Gog and Magog, and that the Gentiles would be annihilated and eliminated from existence. In that Third World War, the Jewish mission of Tikkun Olam, of releasing the sparks from the shells of darkness, releasing the Jews from the grasp of Amalek, the Kelipat, would be completed, and the Gentiles would be completely exterminated and eliminated from existence. So that was the game that was being played by Churchill, and I was the only one who understood it and explained it at that time. Now it's far more well known because of me, that he was advocating for Zionism against Bolshevism at the same time that the Bolsheviks, many of them, were advocating against Zionism in favor of international Marxism. They both arrive at the same destination, which is the extermination of the Gentiles through creating a global government. The global government is to be in perpetual war and permanent revolution so that the best of the Gentiles are perpetually exterminated. The Gentiles are turned into an ape-like people ruled by Jews so that the Jews will have an easy time ultimately completely exterminating all of us. So I was explaining all this back in 2006, and it was very difficult for people to understand. It blew their minds that I was contradicting all the standard narratives. And I, together with others like Jim Condit Jr., were pointing out that Hitler was a fraud and that Nazism itself was aligned with Zionism and Bolshevism. And so this mentor character, as I wrote, intimated in the Jewish Chronicle on 4 April 1919 on page 7 that Bolshevism was revenge against the Gentile nations for not allowing the Jews their own nation and for not willfully succumbing to the Jewish messianic prophecy of a world government run by Jews. And then in this subchapter, I was discussing Sir Winston Churchill offered the world a carrot and a stick on behalf of the Zionist Jews in a statement published in the Illustrated Sunday Herald on 8 February 1920 on page 5. Churchill threatens God's wrath in the form of Bolshevism on any nation that does not commit itself to the Zionist cause, and promises God's gift to any nation which sponsors Zionism. It was an ancient Zionist appeal to superstitious fear. And as I pointed out, that superstitious fear was the one that, as I said at the time, all the Christian Zionists were pushing, that if you bless Israel, you will be blessed, and if you curse Israel, you will be cursed. So the communists are also trying to dupe Gentiles in their minds into cursing themselves to extermination by being the leaders, the controlled opposition of the anti-Zionist movement. And I was the only one who was hammering that fact that all these anti-Zionists in the alternative media were being steered by Israelis and Russians. It was a total subversion. It is completely controlled opposition, and their ultimate goal is to get you behind the communists, behind Xi Jinping, behind Putin, behind Trump, so that Edom, the West, the Roman Amalekite Edomite West, can be destroyed by the behemoth of the Eurasianist communist East, which is aligned with the Muslims. This is the Leviathan of Christianity against the behemoth of Islam and Marxism. It was the original plan in the book of Job for mutually assured destruction. The Jews created atomic bombs. Edvard Teller created thermonuclear weapons. And the Jews gave that technology from America to the Soviet Union so that the behemoth and the Leviathan could fight and exterminate one another. Churchill traveled to Palestine and was an outspoken champion of Zionism in the British government. Some argue that Churchill was also a crypto-Jew who had a Jewish mother. I think her name was Jenny, if I remember correctly. Churchill aggressively spoke out on behalf of Zionism in June of 1921 before the House of Commons in an effort to justify the unfair appropriation of the nation by a minority population of Jews. I also want people to understand I was the only one saying all this at that time. I was the only one pointing out that Churchill was a Zionist. All the others in the alternative media were trying to claim that Churchill was an anti-Zionist because of that Illustrated Sunday Herald article. And now they're trying to say that Churchill himself was responsible for World War II, which is complete horseshit. In 1948, when Israel became a nation state, Churchill wrote to Chaim Weizmann, "What a fine moment it was for an old Zionist like me," Churchill calling himself an old Zionist in 48. Christopher Sykes details much of Churchill's Zionist activities in his book, Crossroads to Israel, etc., where Churchill paints Jews in a bad light. It is done as a threat to Gentiles, not as an attack on Jews. And his arguments were planted in his head by his Zionist cohorts, as evinced by Chaim Weizmann's speech in Jerusalem in January of 1920, as captured in an article, Eine große Rede Weizmanns in Jerusalem vor der Abreise aus Palästina. Jüdische Rundschau, Heft 20, Nummer 4, 16 Januar 1920, Seite 4, which stated, inter alia, among other things, Professor Weizmann emphatically declared that the beauty of the ideals of the Jewish Renaissance was critical for the English Declaration. It is a misconception that England made the proposal to us only out of self-interest. Lloyd George, who was a Christian Zionist, a fanatical Christian, once said, "I know the Palestinian front far better than the French because I am well acquainted with every borough and every brook from the Bible." For the English, Palestine is above all else a biblical issue. As I proved in this book and many others, Zionism was forwarded by Talmudists and Kabbalists like Isaac Newton and his student Samuel Clarke. It was strongly advocated by the Protestant movement, and I gave hundreds of citations on the being and attributes of God and all the books that these Protestants working for the Jews wrote to advance the idea of the restoration of the Jews to Palestine in the name of the return of Christ. The English still believe in the Bible more than many classes of Jewry. Therefore, the idealistic reasons came first, and afterwards the material reasons were added. It was we who made it clear to the English political leaders that it was in England's interest to unite with us to spread the wings of the British eagle out over Palestine. I was also the first in this book to bring up how Disraeli was trying to dupe the British into the Suez in Egypt to make them a protective force for Jews to settle in Palestine on the pretext that they would have to be saved by those settlements of Jews in Palestine who would safeguard supposedly British interests in the Suez. Napoleon had earlier played the same game and pitched similar bullshit in his quest to conquer Egypt. As I proved in this book, this was an ongoing process of duping people. Americans were then duped into sponsoring Zionism, as I proved in this book and in my book, the Jewish genocide of Armenian Christians, also in 2006. It was Judge Mordecai Manuel Noah, who together with the Rothschilds were pitching the idea of America as a force for Zionism from 1814 through 1844 or 45. You can find all those in my book on, that's a source book of racial Zionism at my website, CJBbooks.com. And so the British were also duped because Queen Victoria was told that she was the Empress of India and they needed this Suez Canal so that it would be a faster route than going around the Cape of Good Hope to bring goods for the Rothschilds' tea empire in India. India's long been a place for spices. We see Indians dispersed in Muslim countries throughout Africa and the Middle East still selling their spices. And I did a whole video that I never posted about the fact that when Indians and Chinese move into other nations, they form tight-knit communities and they act in clannish ways. They only patronize one another's businesses and services. They only hire their own people. And then they suck all this wealth out and ship it back to India and China. And in this video I made, but I never posted because I was into so many other things, this idea that Trump, with his gold card visa for $5 million, is going to pay off the national debt and boost the American economy is complete nonsense. These people are going to come in, as they have been for decades, and they're going to engage in espionage on America. They're going to rip off all our industries, all our technologies. They're going to steal everything from academia. They're going to train their students in our universities instead of our people being trained in our universities. And they're going to send all this knowledge and technology back to China and India, and they're going to use it to manufacture industries that outcompete us, and they're going to use it to manufacture weapons with which to exterminate us. So it's going to very much be a net loss for each of those $5 million per head. We're going to lose a hell of a lot more than that as they suck out the wealth, as they've done so terribly to the city of San Francisco and to the city of London, and to not meaning the banking city of London, but the whole greater metropolitan London area and all of England and all of Great Britain. They have sucked out that wealth and shipped it back to India and China. And they have sucked out the wealth of Toronto and Montreal and ripped off the Canadians and pulled away their wealth and shipped it back to India and China. And now Trump is very much in the process of setting it up so that the Indians and the Chinese can come here and form these corrupt communities that work against the best interests of Americans whom they view as stupid and gullible for allowing all this to happen. And they'll smile and bow at us as they take over the professions and take over academia and industry and engage in massive espionage to steal all our technological and military secrets and ship them back together with our wealth to China and India. And we're getting sucked into these wars between the Muslim Indians and the Pakistanis, who are just Muslim Indians that broke off and formed their own nations, carving out of India as the British Empire fell. That was one of the reasons why the communist Lenin and this whole idea of separatist movements and secessionist movements took hold in India was from the communists of the Soviet Union, who were pitching this idea to the Muslims and to the Hindus to break away from the British Empire, and then the Muslims to fight with the Hindus to break away to form Pakistan. All of this was to break down the nations into smaller and smaller nations so that they would engage in perpetual war and perpetual revolution against one another, and so that the Gentiles would kill off and consume one another. And ultimately, all of these were to be brought into the fold of the Soviet communist empire. And they very much brought Pakistan into that fold and India into that fold. But they are now bringing India through the Hindu Vata movement into the Zionist fold of Israel and America, so they can draw America into these horseshit wars between Pakistanis and Indians, where brothers are killing brothers, these pointless religious wars with this Abrahamic religion of Islam against this idolatrous pagan religion of Hinduism. These people are of the same blood. There are no big leaders in the world calling for peace conferences, trying to turn down the temperature on this fight, as I've been tweeting about on X. It's all a sham. Where is the international community to prevent this bloodshed, this catastrophe in Egypt, in Asia, to rival and exceed the catastrophe that is going on in Ukraine? Where is the international community trying to head off a nuclear war between Pakistan and India? I was writing about this in my blogs in 2006 onward, and all of that was censored off the internet, although you can still find it on the Wayback Machine if you search for jewishlacism.blogspot.com. And if you go through those, I posted an archive of all that. And if you search for Pakistan and India, you'll find my writings on how all this has been being set up. And all of this comes out of this Leninist, Marxist idea of secessionist, separatist movements to break everything up into smaller pieces that the international government can gobble up. And they always said that they were fighting against British imperialism and colonialism, and that was to dupe the indigenous peoples into decolonizing so that they could then be sucked into the far worse international communist global Jewish government and become colonies of the Zionists, who will rule the world out of Jerusalem when they anoint King Messiah, David HaMelech, Messiah, son of David. So Weizmann wrote, it was we who made it clear to the English political leaders that it was in England's interest to unite with us to spread the wings of the British eagle out over Palestine. We did not achieve the declaration by way of miracles, but rather through persistent propaganda, through constant demonstration of the vigor of our people. Zionist and communist Jews were frequently lauded or attacked by commentators in this period as being the people of the greatest energy. And Einstein boasted that the Zionists and the Jews and the communists were the people with the greatest energy, and that's how they were able to defeat the Gentiles. That was a common boast of the Zionists in this period. It was we who made it clear to the English political leaders that it was in England's interest to unite with us to spread the wings of the British eagle out over Palestine. We did not achieve the declaration by way of miracles, but rather through persistent propaganda, through constant demonstration of the vigor of our people. We told the people in charge, and this is the big one, we are taking over Palestine whether you like it or not. You can accelerate or delay our arrival, but it is better for you to help us, because if you don't, our constructive power will turn destructive and overthrow the entire world. That was the Weizmann, Chaim Weizmann carrot and stick that inspired Winston Churchill to pen his article with the same threat: submit to the Zionists or fall to the Bolsheviks and be exterminated. Be a slave or be exterminated. Jews are compelled to offer that as their peace terms when seeking to conquer the nations, the Goyim. They have to say to them, you at this moment have the option: submit to becoming our slaves, or we will conquer you and exterminate you. That's what Weizmann was doing. He was following Jewish law, the Jewish law of Deuteronomy, I think it's chapter 20, the Jewish law of Maimonides in his book on kings and wars, I think chapter 10 through 12 or something like that. This is the threat that they have to utter to fulfill Jewish law. They have to say to you, submit to us as our slaves, get on your knees and lick the dust. Psalms talks about the kings and queens of the world licking the dust before the feet of King David, David HaMelech, Messiah, son of David, or we will exterminate you. We will blot you out. So I went on through this, and this is a 3,000-page book, by the way, through the Zionists, though the Zionists dominated the proceedings of the Treaty of Versailles, as I was speaking about before, later dominated the proceedings of the League of Nations and the Palestine Mandate. The masses of Jews did not want to go to Palestine. Since the Jewish masses failed to heed the Zionist threats, Weizmann and his fellow Zionists brought worldwide tumult upon the Gentiles as well as the Jews, just as Chaim Weizmann had promised and threatened. Weizmann took his cue from Theodor Herzl, who strongly believed that anti-Semitism was the best means to achieve a Jewish state. Herzl unwisely believed that he could threaten the governments of the world with absolute impunity. The governments will give us their friendly assistance because we relieve them of the danger of a revolution, a Bolshevik Jewish revolution. That didn't exist at the time that Herzl talked about this. Herzl knew that the Bolshevik Jews were coming because of the revolutions that were being instigated in Russia, which would start with the Jews. And because of Marx, Disraeli wrote in his book, I think it was Coningsby, that there was brewing revolutions throughout Europe, and they were all being stirred up by the Jews. And I think that was in 1844. before the massive revolutions that took place in 1848, the communist revolutions that took place across Europe. So Herzl was familiar with all this. He says, as the proletariat, no one can fight against the Jews because as they fall, they become the proletariat and the revolutionaries who wipe out the Gentiles. And as they rise, they become the capitalist bankers who fund the communist revolutionaries and wipe out the Jews. So if they persecute the Jews, they drive them into the revolutionary class. And if they embrace the Jews, they enrich them to become the banker class, and the Gentiles are screwed either way. This is always a process by which you lose either way. You lose with the communists, you fulfill their goal for global government, and you lose with the Zionists, you fulfill their nationalistic goal to create the hub of their empire in Jerusalem from where they are to rule the entire world. And this is the whole plan of the Old Testament and New. The governments will give us their friendly assistance, this is Theodor Herzl talking, because we relieve them of the danger of a revolution which would start with the Jews and stop who knows where. Same threat that Weizmann and later Churchill were uttering. Herzl wrote in his book, The Jewish State, when we sink, we become a revolutionary proletariat, the subordinate officers of the Revolutionary Party. When we rise, there rises also our terrible power of the purse. Again, people will say that I am furnishing the anti-Semites with weapons. Why so? Because I admit the truth? Because I do not maintain that there are none but excellent men amongst us? Note the theme of both Weizmann and his student Churchill, that there are good Jews and bad Jews, and you better not side with the bad Jews because it'll produce your extermination. Again, people will say that I am showing our enemies the way to injure us. This I absolutely dispute. My proposal could only be carried out with the free consent of the majority of Jews. Individuals or even powerful bodies of Jews might be attacked, but governments will take no action against the collective nation. The equal rights of Jews before the law cannot be withdrawn where they have once been conceded, for the first attempt at withdrawal would immediately drive all Jews, rich and poor alike, into the ranks of the Revolutionary Party. That is what Churchill and Weizmann are threatening, that if we don't submit and become slaves of the Zionists, the revolutionary Bolsheviks will come and exterminate us. The first official violation of Jewish liberties invariably brings about economic crisis. The Rothschilds were famous for doing that the entire 19th century, just before Herzl wrote this in 1895, published it in 1896. Therefore, no weapons can be effectually used against us because these cut the hands that wield them. And then I went on to republish that full article by Churchill based on the ideas of Weizmann and Herzl. And in my book, The Manufacture and Sale of Citing Einstein, which I've been reading from for you, I gave all the articles of and about the Rothschilds where they were threatening people that they had to obey the Jews, or the Rothschilds would use their wealth to bring other nations against those nations that opposed the Jews and would crush and destroy them. As Jacob Schiff, who is closely related to the Rothschilds and lived in the same buildings and streets with them in Frankfurt, Germany, as he ultimately did do to the Russians, excluding them from the money markets after bringing them into war with the Japanese, and then later excluding them from the money markets after bringing them into World War I in order to defeat them both militarily and economically. Schiff gave communist propaganda to the Russian officers and soldiers who were captured by the Japanese. He financed the Japanese to provide them with communist literature that he provided so that they could then carry out the 1905 revolution and then the March and October revolutions of 1917, which were ultimately successful. The Jews, as they would later do in Germany during the war, sabotaged the Russian military efforts with strikes and by providing Russian soldiers and German soldiers with substandard munitions and weapons to undermine their military effort, even though they were citizens living in Germany and Russia. They betrayed the nation and ultimately brought both nations into devastation in both world wars. And we now have a coming third. Again, I republished Churchill's full article and gave the proper interpretation of what it was that Churchill was actually advocating, and he was promoting Zionism, not saying that Zionism was bad, which was what all the people in the alternative media were saying at that time in contradiction to the truth. And I brought the truth to light, and thankfully my words have resonated and people now understand that Churchill was advocating, not condemning Zionism, and he was using Bolshevism as a threat. So it was a carrot and a stick to get everyone in the world following this same agenda to create the Zionist nation, which is to lead the global government of the Bolsheviks and to ultimately exterminate all of the Gentiles. I want to thank all of my wonderful contributors. You can contribute at my website, CJBbooks.com. You can find my book, The Manufacture and Sale of Saint Einstein from 2006, in which I laid all this out, in which I explained the meaning of Amalek, that Christianity is a duplicitous trap that was set for the Romans, the Greeks, and the Egyptians, and how that Christian Zionists are helping all of this, that Christianity is itself a trap, that Samael is Satan, etc., etc. I have many other subsequent books in which I elaborate upon that work, but I had the whole groundwork foundation all laid out in that book in 2006, and you're going to find it a tremendous resource. I have it available as a PDF, and you can do Control F or Command F search for keywords in that book, and you're going to find references, sometimes dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of citations for each individual footnote. And I anticipated all the things that are happening today, and I am warning you that this plan is about to be fulfilled, and I am proposing solutions, and we need to get busy on those solutions. I want to do a cruise vlog or a walk and talk soon about creating a state, a new country, very much like the founding fathers of America did, with very similar immigration and naturalization policies, which are eugenic, looking for people of good character, people of European descent, to safeguard their interests. I am for all of humanity, to preserve all of human life. But I think that I know that what they are doing is trying to pit the whole world against white people, because they believe that we are the reincarnation of the soul of the Romans, and that the Romans became the Edomite nations, which the Old Testament says has to be completely exterminated, the Amalekites that have to be blotted out as if they never existed in the first place, and that if we allow other peoples in and we don't have a screening process that greatly exceeds that of the founding fathers of America, we will be led into subversion again, and we'll be right back where we started. I don't wish ill will or harm anybody else on the earth, but I do acknowledge that they are being pitted, and they are enemies of us at this time, and we need a state where we can defend ourselves, and we need a military with technology to defend ourselves. Again, I'm going to get into this much more deeply and intimately, and I hope in a walk and talk or a cruise vlog. But it has to, weapons, gaining an advantage with weapons, with Greek fire, with the compound bow, with the chariot, with the cannon, with the musket, with the rifled bore that enables precision shots, with TNT, with mustard gas, with atomic bombs, with thermonuclear weapons. All of these gave an overwhelming advantage that enabled nations to survive and defeat their enemies. We need the smartest, the most sophisticated, talented, educated, creative people from among our people to join with us and to develop new physics and new geometry that enable weapons which far exceed, which exponentially exceed, literally in the functions of these equations, exponentially exceed the power of thermonuclear weapons, the power of our kinetic weapons. And we can do that. And I have ideas as to how to do that that need to be tested. And we can get other pioneering minds to give us that technological edge that will enable us to survive. And we need that. We desperately need that, because they are pitting the entire earth against us. They are literally destroying our genetics to make us infertile, to exterminate us. And they are planting hostile forces on our shores, and planting on our shores the battles between hostile forces from other regions of the world to generate chaos and disunion and degeneracy in all of our countries, and to exterminate us. And if we glean from our people all of our best into a congregated effort where they are no longer helping these people who engage in espionage against us, where they are no longer helping these subverted politicians who are pitting the world against us, but instead are building something, instead of tearing everything down, building something to preserve us and defend us from our enemies, we can survive. There is a high possibility that if we don't do this, we are about to be exterminated from off the face of the earth. We can do it, and that is what has to be done. We need to gain a scientific and technological advantage over all of our competitors and adversaries, not with the intent or purpose of overtaking them and harming them, but instead for the purpose of deterring them from overwhelming and harming us, and defending ourselves from the attacks that are taking place right now, and from the planned attacks that were planned out 2,500 years ago in the Old Testament, which they are about to fulfill as their plans, as I always said, and as I was saying in my book in 2006 in The Manufacture and Sale of St. Einstein, all over the internet, in interviews and videos I made at that time. They view their prophecies as their plans. They know that they themselves have to do all this. Their God doesn't exist. Their gods don't exist. And they are setting about to artificially fulfill these prophecies, because these prophecies are their script, their plan. And it ends with our extermination. And all of these supposed dichotomies and dialectics and dual forces are all engineered to arrive at the same destination of our extermination: Christianity, Islam, communism, and Zionism, and Noahidism, and Marxism, and Nazism, and Jewish capitalism. all produce the same end result. It is good for the Jews and only for the Jews and bad for everyone else. All their alliances are temporary and subversions meant to produce that same ultimate result of a global government and empire run by them, in which the Gentiles are offered to either submit as their slaves or be exterminated, and ultimately to be completely exterminated, so that the Kelly pot, the shattered shards of the vessels, are the chaos, the primordial chaos is eliminated from existence, and only the holy light stolen from the Gentiles is left, and left in the hands of the Jews, who stand alone as the last standing after the Gentiles exterminate each other because they're too stupid to understand how they're being duped. We need smart people who are not duped. We need to train them. We need to bring them together, and we need to build something instead of tearing everything down. I want to again thank all my contributors. If you would like to contribute, you can do so at CJBbooks.com. I want to thank all the people who are helping me to expose Adam Green. Thank you very much. That's important to me. And I will see all you good and wonderful people next time. Beware the world to come.